I came home from the hardware store and found two movers carrying my bedroom furniture down the hallway. For a second, I thought they had the wrong room. Then I saw my daughter-in-law, Melissa, standing near the front door with a clipboard in her hand. She smiled like everything was perfectly normal. "Oh, good, you're back," she said. "We moved you into the garage apartment. My parents need the master bedroom while they're staying here." I stared at her. My dresser was halfway down the hall. My clothes were packed in boxes. The photos of my late wife that had been sitting on my nightstand for years were stacked beside the wall like they didn't matter. Nobody had called me. Nobody had asked me. My son and his wife had given away my bedroom while I was out buying supplies to fix a leaking fence on the property. My son finally walked into the hallway. "We thought it would be more comfortable for everyone," he said. I looked at him for a few seconds. Then I nodded. "Okay." That was all I said. But later that night, after everyone was asleep, I made one phone call. And before this was over, my son was going to learn something he had forgotten. The house wasn't his. It was mine. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 67 years old. I spent most of my life working construction, not sitting behind a desk, not managing people from an office. I built things, houses, garages, additions, decks. If something needed to be built, fixed, repaired, or rebuilt, I was usually the person doing it. My wife Linda used to joke that I couldn't walk into a room without finding something to improve. She wasn't wrong. The house I lived in was the biggest project of my life. I bought the land when I was young. Over the years, I expanded it piece by piece. Every room had a memory attached to it. The kitchen where my wife taught our son how to bake cookies. The living room where we spent Christmas mornings. The backyard where I taught my son how to throw a baseball. After my wife passed away, the house became more than a home. It became the place where I still felt close to her. For several years, it was just me. Quiet, peaceful. Then my son's business failed. He had invested most of his savings into a landscaping company. The partnership fell apart. The bills piled up. A few months later, he called me. "Dad, I hate asking this." "You don't have to hate it," I told him. "What do you need?" There was a long pause. Then he said they were struggling. Rent was behind. The pressure was getting worse. He didn't know what to do. I didn't think twice. "Bring the family here." "What?" "You heard me." "Dad, are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. You're my son." A week later, my son, my daughter-in-law, and my two grandchildren moved in. At first, everything felt good. The house was alive again. The kids ran through the hallways. The dinner table was full. The noise didn't bother me. I actually enjoyed it. My son thanked me constantly. My daughter-in-law told everyone how generous I was. Whenever relatives visited, they talked about how lucky they were to have family willing to help. I paid most of the household expenses, property taxes, utilities, insurance, repairs. If the kids needed something, I usually covered it. I never complained. That's what family does. At least, that's what I believed. The changes started small enough that I ignored them. One Saturday morning, I walked into the living room looking for my favorite chair. It wasn't there. The chair had been sitting in the same spot for almost 15 years. My wife loved that chair because she said it looked terrible. I loved it because it was comfortable. I searched the room. Then I searched the garage. Finally, I found my daughter-in-law in the kitchen. "Have you seen my chair?" She barely looked up from her phone. "We donated it." I thought I heard her wrong. "You donated it?" "Yeah." I waited for more explanation. None came. Why? It didn't really match the room. I just stood there. A few seconds later, my son walked in. "We're updating things, Dad." "You donated my chair." It was old. I looked at him. Then I looked around the kitchen. Nobody seemed to understand why that might bother me. My son shrugged. "We're just trying to modernize things." That sentence became their favorite answer. Every time something disappeared, every time something changed, every time I asked a question. We're just trying to modernize things. Family photographs were removed. Pictures of my wife vanished from hallways, furniture got replaced, walls got repainted. Decorations that had been there for decades quietly disappeared, and every change happened without a single conversation. The strange part wasn't the furniture, it was the attitude. Nobody asked anymore. They informed me after decisions had already been made. Months passed. The house still belonged to me, but it slowly stopped feeling like mine. Then I started noticing something else. My opinions didn't matter anymore. One afternoon I suggested fixing the back patio. My son nodded without listening. The next week he hired someone else. Another time I offered an idea about the backyard. Nobody responded. The conversation simply continued around me, like I wasn't even there. The first time it happened, I thought I was imagining it. The 10th time, I knew I wasn't. Then my daughter-in-law started calling the property our house. At first I ignored it. People say things casually, but she kept saying it, to neighbors, to friends, to relatives. One afternoon I was watering flowers when I heard her talking to someone across the fence. "We love our house," she said. "Our house has so much space. Our house is perfect for the kids." I remember standing there holding the garden hose, waiting for her to correct herself. She never did. My son didn't either. The words shouldn't have bothered me, but they did, because they revealed something, a shift in thinking, a shift I hadn't noticed before. They weren't acting like guests anymore. They were acting like owners. Not long after that, the exclusion started. Family dinners happened without me. One evening I walked into the kitchen and found dirty plates in the sink. Everyone had already eaten. "Oh," my daughter-in-law said. "We didn't know when you'd be hungry." I had been in the workshop all afternoon. 30 feet away, another weekend they ordered takeout. Nobody asked what I wanted. Another time they planned a family outing. I found out when I saw photos online. I never said much. I kept telling myself not to overreact. But every little thing added up. Every dismissal, every assumption, every decision made without me. Then my daughter-in-law's parents arrived. That changed everything. Supposedly they were visiting for 2 weeks. 2 weeks became a month became longer. Soon they were everywhere. Her father criticized the house. Her mother rearranged cabinets. Both acted as though they belonged there, and somehow everyone treated that as normal. One afternoon her mother looked around the living room and said, "If this house is going to stay in the family, a lot of changes need to happen." I remember hearing it clearly. Nobody corrected her. Not my daughter-in-law, not my son. Nobody. The room got quiet. Then the conversation moved on, like she hadn't just said something outrageous. A few weeks later came the day I found movers carrying my furniture. The day this story started. I walked through the house and saw box after box stacked outside my bedroom. My bed was gone, my dresser was gone, even my clothes had been packed. When I opened the garage apartment, everything had already been moved. A bed, a television, my belongings. Someone had planned the entire thing. My son stood beside me. "We figured you'd like the privacy." I looked around, then I looked back at him. "Did you ask me?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's only temporary." That wasn't an answer, but I could already tell he didn't care. That night I sat alone in the garage apartment. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. The room itself wasn't bad. Years earlier I had built it as a guest space. The problem wasn't the room. The problem was what it represented. They had decided where I would live inside my own house, and nobody thought I deserved a vote. The next morning, everyone acted normal. My daughter-in-law's parents were settled into my bedroom. Breakfast was cheerful. People laughed. Coffee was poured. Nobody apologized. Nobody acknowledged how insulting the situation was. That bothered me more than the move itself. The assumption. The certainty, the belief that I would simply accept whatever they decided. A couple weeks later, I overheard a conversation. I wasn't trying to listen. I was walking down the hallway when I heard my son speaking. Once everything transfers over, we'll finally be able to do what we want. Someone laughed. Then another voice said, "We're almost there." I slowed down. The moment I got closer, the room went silent. When I entered, everyone suddenly started talking about something else. Nobody looked comfortable. My daughter-in-law wouldn't meet my eyes. Her parents exchanged quick glances. My son looked irritated, not guilty, irritated, like I had interrupted something. That was the moment suspicion turned into something stronger. Something wasn't right. For the next several days, I paid attention. Conversation stopped when I entered rooms. Papers disappeared when I got close. Topics changed whenever I asked questions. Then one evening, I found the answer. My son had left his laptop open on the dining room table. I walked past it. Then I stopped. My name was visible in an email preview. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. Then I looked again. And again. I sat down. What I found changed everything. There were emails, dozens of the messages between my son, my daughter-in-law, her parents, even a real estate. Attorney property discussions, estate. Plans, ownership transfers, strategies. One message said, "Once Dad signs, we'll finally have control of everything." Felt my stomach drop. I kept reading. Another email said, "The garage move is the first step." Another said he'll probably agree if we present it as simplifying his life. I sat there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, just reading. Every confusing moment suddenly made sense. The furniture, the bedroom, the exclusions, the way they spoke about the house. None of it was random. None of it was accidental. They weren't adjusting to shared living. They were slowly pushing me out. The worst part wasn't the house. It was my son, the little boy I had carried on my shoulders, the kid I taught to ride a bicycle, the young man I opened my home to when he needed help. He was part of how that hurt more than anything. I sat in the garage, apartment until almost sunrise. Somewhere during those hours, something changed inside me. I stopped asking why. I stopped hoping there was another explanation. The hurt turned into clarity, and clarity turned into action. The next morning, I called an attorney. Over the next few weeks, I gathered every document I could find. Emails, records, property, paperwork, financial information, everything. My attorney reviewed it all. Then we got to work. The house was placed into a protected trust. My estate plan was rewritten. Every legal protection available was put in place. Everything was documented properly. Everything was done legally, and nobody knew. Meanwhile, life inside the house continued as usual. My son believed I was clueless. My daughter-in-law continued making plans. Her parents continued acting like future owners. The less I spoke, the more confident they became. They thought silence meant weakness. Didn't, it meant preparation. Eventually, I learned they expected me to sign transfer documents. That explained the sudden optimism in the house, the private conversations, the Malibu celebrations. They thought the finish line was close. Then came the dinner that ended everything. My daughter-in-law organized a large family gathering. Relatives arrived, friends stopped by. Her parents looked happier than I'd seen them in months. Knew exactly why. They thought they had already won. Halfway through the evening, my son stood up to make a toast. He talked about family, about the future, about building something lasting. Several people smiled. A few exchanged knowing looks. Then he sat down and I stood up. I'd like to say something. The room went quiet. Placed a thick folder on the table. Son looked confused. My daughter-in-law looked nervous. Opened the folder. Then I started reading. Email after email, message after message on every discussion, every plan, every strategy. Nobody interrupted. As the truth came out, faces changed. My son lost all color. My daughter-in-law stared at the table. Her parents looked like they wanted to disappear. When I finished, I placed the final document in front of everyone. "The house is protected," I said calmly. I looked at my son. "There will be no transfer." Then I looked at my daughter-in-law. "The paperwork you've been planning around means nothing." Silence filled the room. Finally, my son spoke. "Dad, we can explain." I shook my head. "No, you really can't." Nobody argued after that, because the evidence was sitting right in front of them. Then I explained what would happen next. My financial support was ending immediately. No more assistance, no more bills paid, no more access to my resources, and then I handed them formal notice. They had time to find another place to live. My daughter-in-law's father looked stunned. "You'd do this to family?" I looked directly at him. Family wouldn't have tried to take someone's home. Nobody had an answer. For the first time in years, I controlled the conversation. Not because I raised my voice, not because I threatened anyone, because I had the truth. The following weeks were uncomfortable. My son apologized, then he negotiated, then he got angry, then he apologized again. Nothing changed. The decision had already been made. Eventually they moved out. Her parents left first, without the possibility of getting the house. They lost interest quickly. My son and his wife struggled the most. They had spent so much time planning for a future that wasn't theirs. Now they had to build one themselves. Watching them leave wasn't satisfying. It was sad. But sometimes consequences are sad. That doesn't make them wrong. 3 months later, the house felt different, not empty, peaceful. One afternoon, I stood inside the garage. Apartment. The same place they had forced me into. Workers carried out the temporary furniture. In came woodworking benches, storage cabinets, new tools projects. I'd put off for years, finally had a place to live. By evening, everything was finished. I hung a handmade sign above the door. Hayes Workshop. I stepped back and looked at it. The smell of fresh wood filled the room. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not because I beat anyone, not because I got revenge, because my life finally felt like mine again. I walked outside and looked toward the house I built, the house I protected, the house where my wife and I built our family. It was quiet, it was peaceful, and it was still mine. They thought they were pushing me out of my own life. What they really did was remind me that I still had every right to it. The moment they treated loyalty like weakness was the moment they lost everything that loyalty had been giving them.